Hi everybody. My name is Carrie, and I am the Eco AmeriCorps at the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District. And this is the second webinar of our two-part Reclaiming Waste mini-series. Our first webinar last week explored why farmers spread manure. We talked about manure's role in soil health and nutrient cycles, as well as rules and regulations for water quality. And a recording of that webinar is up on our Franklin County NRCD YouTube page if you're interested in watching that after tonight's webinar. And tonight we are here to learn about urine nutrient reclamation for clean waters and fertile farms, aka peecycling, with Rich Earth Institute. And before I hand it over, I was just going to do a quick intro for those of you who might not know what the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District is. So we are one of 14 natural resource conservation districts. NRCDs are non-regulatory local organizations that work with private landowners, state and federal agencies, and other partner organizations to promote and implement conservation programs. And the Franklin County NRCD's mission is to empower and partner with land stewards and communities on the ground by supporting connections that benefit natural resources, water quality, soil health, and the working landscape in Franklin County and across Northwest Vermont. So with that, I am excited to pass it off to you, Julia, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Carrie, and the Franklin NRCD. So I'm Julia Cavicchi. I'm Rich Earth's Education Director, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the work that we do at the Rich Earth Institute, working to complete the food nutrient cycle. So sort of like using manure from animals, this is a way to reclaim the nutrients that humans produce and return those nutrients to agriculture. So I'm going to kind of give a big picture overview of what's currently happening in our nutrient landscape, and what some alternatives to that current paradigm might look like. And then I'll go into the details of how you yourself can reclaim the food nutrient cycle in your own backyard with the nutrients your bodies produce every day. So to get started, the Rich Earth Institute is a research nonprofit based in Brattleboro, Vermont. We've been around for about a decade now, or a little over a decade now. We were founded in 2012. Our vision is a world with abundant clean water and fertile soil achieved by reclaiming the nutrients our bodies produce in a life-sustaining cycle. And we'll learn more about that as I go along here. So to start off, we kind of have to take a step back and look at what's currently happening with the nutrients that we generate in the current paradigm. So with conventional sewer and septic systems, they were designed really well to remove organic matter and pathogens, which was their kind of original intent behind them. But they often still release a vast majority of the nutrients in our wastewater, along with other contaminants like pharmaceuticals, hormones, microplastics, and also emerging contaminants like PFAS, because our human waste gets combined with industrial contaminants, particularly in sewer systems, and all of those, that kind of combined flow then ends up in our water bodies. So with nutrients in particular, when nitrogen and phosphorus accumulate in our water bodies, they can fertilize harmful algal blooms, which then have a kind of wide array of different negative ecological effects, from deoxygenating the water and resulting in mass fish kills to producing neurotoxins that can accumulate in shellfish. And generally kind of not a great thing for our nutrients to be doing, is fertilizing these blooms and causing these negative effects in our water bodies. And in Vermont, the two water bodies that we're really concerned about for nutrient pollution are in the eastern portion of the state and the southern portion of the state. The Connecticut River connects us to the Long Island Sound watershed, which has a lot of problems with nitrogen pollution. And then up in the Lake Champlain watershed, we're particularly focused on phosphorus pollution, which is the limiting nutrient for freshwater ecosystems. So many of you are probably already familiar with Lake Champlain's struggles with this, and some different strategies for helping to mitigate it. And I'm going to kind of introduce urine recycling as one strategy that can form a tool in the toolbox for addressing the nutrient pollution in Lake Champlain. So if we follow kind of the full flow of what's happening with our nutrients, on the one hand, we're producing a lot of, or acquiring a lot of nutrients to fertilize agriculture. And for nitrogen, producing nitrogen fertilizer contributes about 1 to 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions because they're captured from the air in this very energy intensive process called the Haber-Bosch process to produce synthetic fertilizer. And there aren't very many good organic or locally produced nitrogen fertilizer alternative options. Meanwhile, for phosphorus fertilizer, most of phosphorus fertilizer is mined in Morocco and a few other areas that are sort of they're finite rock reserves to begin with, and then they're also sort of geopolitically volatile and unjust mining conditions that produce the phosphorus fertilizer that we often use. It's my dog in the background. Sorry about that. And so we use all that fertilizer to grow the food, which we then eat, and then we excrete our nutrients into large amounts of clean, potable water. So to flush urine alone, we waste about 900 billion gallons of clean water across the country every year just to keep sending those nutrients down on their linear journey here. And then we send them into those sewer and septic systems that are expensive to maintain and also very climate vulnerable, especially as we've seen in Vermont with the flooding in the past year and the destruction that caused our wastewater treatment plants. So instead of this linear paradigm, what we're working on at Rich Earth and what many other partners around the world are working to do is to reconnect the food nutrient cycle and turn that line into a self-sustaining circle where the nutrients from our bodies can return to agriculture and be disconnected from our water system. And so here I like to share the fact that Rich Earth has calculated that every day the average human body produces enough fertilizer to grow the wheat required to bake 1 loaf of bread. And I think this is just kind of a nice way of visualizing the potential for reciprocity between ourselves and the land, where we can produce, what the land needs to sustain itself, and it can in turn feed us in abundance, and that kind of cycle can continue in perpetuity. So if we look at what makes up wastewater in conventional systems, human waste is just a tiny sliver of the total volume, and a lot of what we call wastewater is really just clean, potable water that's been kind of combined together with our small amount of waste. So if we do that relative, and so you can see that volume chart here. And then you can also see when you look at the nutrients in our wastewater, urine actually contains a vast majority of the nitrogen and the phosphorus. So by doing a relatively small act volume-wise of diverting our urine at the source, we can have a potentially big impact on helping to protect those downstream water bodies from nutrient pollution. But you'll see it does contain about half of what this chart calls micropollutants, which really what this means is the pharmaceuticals or medicines that can come out in urine. And so this is actually, a really big concern that a lot of folks have, and something that Rich Earth has actually researched in partnership with the University of Michigan. So I'll just briefly kind of explain some of our research around this question before I keep going. So I think just like we think about what happens in the linear paradigm with our nutrients, a similar thing is happening with our pharmaceuticals, where they're accumulating in water bodies and causing all kinds of negative effects for the species who live there, everything from physiological changes to behavioral changes that ramify up the food chain. So kind of a not great current paradigm pathway for our pharmaceuticals. And if we look at the alternate of instead using that urine to fertilize crops in agriculture, it's a good way of protecting those water bodies from these pharmaceuticals, but of course raises new questions about the impact on the crop and also the long-term soil health. So from our study with Michigan, essentially what we found is that the pharmaceutical compounds seem to be broken down in the soil potentially, but in general really are not being uptaken by the crops at any significant level. So the stat they came up with to communicate that tininess is that you'd have to eat a pound of urine fertilized lettuce every day for 1,000 years to get back the same amount of caffeine that's in 1 cup of coffee. And lettuce and coffee are both kind of worst case scenarios because lettuce is a susceptible crop to accumulating those compounds, and coffee or caffeine is the kind of most common drug found in human urine because everyone drinks coffee, or lots of people do. But this is also a question we're continuing to study, especially around the long-term soil health effects, because if it's the soil microbes that are helping to break down these compounds, we want to know what the effect of doing that work is. So we have a new multi-year research project we're working on with the University of Cornell to look at this. But I think it's important to note that this is sort of very comparable to what's already happening in a lot of places in agriculture, where for irrigation water, farms will often, use water that came out downstream of a different wastewater treatment plant. And that wastewater treatment plant effluent has these same pharmaceutical compounds in it. Um, so anyway, so now just to kind of spotlight a few different peecycling projects that are happening around the world to kind of contextualize the work that we're trying to do here in Vermont. There's been a really big project in South Central Niger that's a farmer-to-farmer education project that has resulted in 3,000 primarily female farmers who now use urine as a fertilizer to increase their ability to grow subsistence crops in Niger. And an interesting thing from this project is that they actually worked with local religious leaders and other kind of village leaders to talk about how they could make this a more socially acceptable practice. And what they decided was once you're going to use the urine as a fertilizer, as opposed to it being a waste product, you just rename it and then it becomes something else. And so they renamed it Oga when it's to be used as fertilizer, which in the Igbo language means the boss. So when you're fertilizing your garden, you're working with the boss. So I thought that was kind of a interesting example. Over in Switzerland, the sort of grandmother institution of urine recycling research is the Swiss Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology. And they have created a spin-off company that's now doing building scale urine diversion installations and producing a fertilizer product that they sell at a profit to gardeners. And they've really inspired a lot of research around the world of academics looking into this question. And then Paris and France in general is really kind of currently leading the way for large scale implementation of urine diversion. Their wastewater treatment agency has identified the importance of urine diversion for protecting the River Seine and dealing with some of Paris's rising population levels to the point where they now subsidize up to 80% of urine diversion projects, which is really exciting to see and something that kind of the rest of us in this movement are really looking towards as sort of the future for how this can be done at a larger scale. These are just a few different organizations working on various aspects of ecological sanitation or circular sanitation in the US. No one's quite doing what Rich Earth is doing on the community scale implementation side of things, but we do have a lot of other partners who are trying to kind of advance this vision for a more sustainable sanitation and agriculture future. So Rich Earth, as I mentioned, was founded back in 2012 with just a few committed folks interested in exploring alternative options for what we can do with our waste. And we now have around 230 urine donors in our community who donate to 2 different urine depots. And we also have toilet installations and barrels and are doing various large scale kind of agriculture field trials with different university partners. So the kind of core of our program is this demonstration program of community scale urine nutrient reclamation, which relies on our urine donors who contribute their nutrients. We now collect about 12,000 gallons of urine every year. And that really serves as the platform for the research and education that we do. And folks sign up to become urine donors for kind of 3 core reasons. One is the water conservation benefit of not having to flush away that much clean, potable water. The other is the ability to protect your watershed in a really unique way of helping prevent that nutrient pollution through, changing what you're doing with your own bodily creation. And then the sustainable fertilizer production and being able to support local farms in a unique way as well. So I'll just quickly walk through the 4 main steps of what our community scale program looks like before shifting gears and talking about how you could do this in your own home garden on a smaller scale kind of way. And we are really interested in supporting more communities and having kind of replications of this community scale type program going in their own in different villages across Vermont as we find more partners who are interested in helping get that kind of thing going. So the first step of our project is, of course, collecting the urine. The main way a lot of our urine donors collect is with this little standalone urine collector that's basically a 2.5 or 5 gallon jug that has a little funnel that sits on top of it. You can either stand or squat to pee over it, or you can also use a personal urination device like a pee style to pee into it. Or you can use something like a nun's cap that fits under your toilet seat and then pour that into the funnel. But with a combination of adding vinegar to the container before you start collecting and a little plastic ball that sits in the funnel throughout your collection, it really is a pretty odorless experience. I've been using one of these in my bathroom for the past 4 years and haven't really, had the odor be an issue, especially with the vinegar. It acidifies the urine and helps prevent some of the smell from happening. And these, I'll mention this at the end too, but these we have available for free for any Lake Champlain resident who's interested in having one and trying it out. So if this seems like something you might be interested in using for your collection for your own garden, definitely get in touch with me and we can talk more about that. So once your container is full in our community program, you bring it to one of our centralized urine depots that has a vacuum pump in it, and it's collected in our storage containers there. And for folks who are interested in a more permanent way of donating their urine, there are these permanent urine diverting toilets that we can install in people's homes that just have a divided bowl. So the front half of the toilet collects the urine into a storage tank, and the back half either flushes or can be a dry compost system. And then there are also various urine-only toilets. If you have, for example, 2 bathrooms in your house, the urine-only toilets are kind of a simpler way of getting that sort of system going. And so either from the depot or from people's homes, once the storage containers are full, we go around with our truck and just pump out the nutrients, sort of the inverse of getting your oil delivered. You can get your nutrients lifted away. And it's just a Pete's Tire Barn truck, actually, that we've retrofitted with a vacuum pump so we can pump the urine onto and off of the truck. And then the final step in our community scale program before we bring it to the farms is treatment. We use the EPA approved method for biosolid treatment, which is sort of the most precautionary method, so that we're certified by the state of Vermont as a Class A exceptional quality urine fertilizer product that can be applied to any farmland. Just by heating the urine to 80 degrees Celsius for 1.5 minutes. And this pasteurizer is developed by our spin-off company, Brightwater Tools, which is now selling these along with a few other treatment options to folks trying to implement this kind of program across the country. And so the final step is fertilization. We primarily fertilize hay fields, but have also done a number of other field trials with other farm partners. We do a lot of USDA SARE research with farm partners to explore application methods on different crops. One of our earliest studies was looking at hay yield results, comparing urine fertilizer to synthetic fertilizer, and essentially found that it, when applied at the same nitrogen loading rate, can have the same impact on increasing hay yield, which was exciting to see. We've also done sweet corn, retrofitting our farm partner's tractor so that as he's going through and cultivating his rows, he can just be applying the urine as he goes and not have to take an extra trip for the urine. I can personally say this is a picture of the corn at one of our field days we had. It's some of the sweetest corn I've ever tasted. I don't know if it's because of the urine fertilizer. It's just really great corn that this farmer grows, but I was a big fan of that corn that day. One other thing we've been trying at our research center is this anthrovermiponic system. That's a hydroponic system that combines the worm castings and urine, and they kind of make a match made in heaven in terms of the nutrients you might want in a hydroponic system. So we grow lettuce with this system and donate it to our local food bank and also eat it as staff. And the system is designed by a group in California called Dark Nectar Cooperative, who's really interested in building out this kind of system for urban agriculture contexts, or to create kind of food justice options for folks who don't have access to land, and a way to just enable people to use their own nutrients from their bodies to grow something in a very compact way to produce food. So really excited to be trialing that here in Vermont. So as I said earlier, we're really interested in supporting more communities and getting this kind of community scale project going. We have a guide that details what we've done in Brattleboro, and we also do consulting with different communities to try to help folks in getting this kind of project off the ground. One big place where we're focusing on that right now is Cape Cod. They have some of the nation's first municipal funding from the town of Falmouth to get a urine diversion pilot project going, because Cape Cod has some really major nutrient pollution problems down there. And then sort of on the kind of line of thought around why might Vermont villages or communities be interested in implementing something like this, we go back to that question of what does climate resilient sanitation look like in Vermont? And I think we've seen with all of the flooding, both our septic systems and our wastewater treatment plants aren't really set up to deal with these kinds of very high volume precipitation events that happen. So we saw a lot of septic systems that were destroyed by the flooding, as well as wastewater treatment plants that were just totally disrupted. And then at the same time, if we look at kind of where town planning is trying to go in terms of creating more climate smart cities or villages where we have the goals of smart growth and compact village settlement so that you can have more people living in village centers and have less rural sprawl happening, and also have people living closer to the resources they might need to access. And also Vermont being a receiving state for climate migrants now. This kind of raises new issues for wastewater treatment plants where you have sort of limitations on options because you need a certain amount of space for septic systems, and many villages can't install something like a sewer system is kind of economically not a viable option. So you start to see people kind of looking potentially to a smaller scale kind of on-site reuse system that could unlock some of these village goals that are otherwise inhibited by current wastewater treatment options. So we looked a little bit at this question in the village sanitation pilot study that Richard produced a couple of years ago. And I think one of the big things we identified is that we really need to focus on figuring out regulatory pathways for enabling these kinds of full-scale innovative systems to be permitted in Vermont, and reduce the kind of reliance on redundant systems of, currently in Vermont, if you have a compost toilet and a gray water reuse system, you still need to install a septic system. So how can we create new pathways to allow these kinds of options to be viable? So there currently is a bill in the House that we've helped to produce that's focused on creating a working group to have regulators and other stakeholders come together and look at some of these regulatory pathways. All right, so now just to shift gears a little bit, what is currently legal and is possible anywhere in the country, anywhere you are, where you eat and pee and have a little patch of land that you can fertilize, is peecycling in your own backyard with your own nutrients. So we have a guide, You're in My Garden, which goes through all the steps of how you might want to do this. I'll kind of cover some of the basics of what's in the guide, but you can also check those out on our website. But I think the first thing to know before fertilizing your garden is, what is the nutrient content of urine? It's got an NPK analysis, just like any other fertilizer. This is analysis based on community collected urine from our program, and is generally the same. It might vary slightly depending on your diet. If you have a higher protein diet, you might have slightly higher nitrogen, but generally it's around 0.6, 0.1, 0.2. It's interesting to note that urine also has a wide range of micronutrients that synthetic fertilizers you buy in the store might not have, because our bodies kind of produce sort of a complete fertilizer based on the nutrients that we eat and then excrete. So it can form more of a complete fertilizer for your plants than synthetic fertilizers might. And I think this is really kind of a big point about using urine as a fertilizer. If you forget any of the other things I say for the home gardening side, I think this is the big one to take away, is that the form of nitrogen in urine is really susceptible to being lost to the air anytime urine is exposed to air. So basically what this means is you want to minimize air exposure throughout your collection, storage, and application process. There are a few different ways to do that I'll talk through in some of the following slides. But preventing this ammonia volatilization is really the important thing to keep in mind, so that you're maintaining the nutrient content in your urine, and also will have the side benefit of making it a less smelly experience, because when you smell the nitrogen volatilizing as ammonia, you're kind of, that's the sort of smelly urine-y smell that you might you might know. So for collection, sort of like our community scale program, there are a lot of ways to collect for your garden. These peecycling kits we have available for folks in the Lake Champlain watershed. It comes with a little spout that you can connect to your container once it's full, so it's easy to transfer into a watering can. There are also a lot of DIY ways people collect. We have a community science survey for home gardeners who peacycle. So we have gathered a lot of data on the different ways that people do this in their own homes already. Wide mouth laundry detergent bottles are a kind of surprisingly common one that folks reported. Also kitty litter containers. And then Toilets for People is a Vermont-based compost toilet company that sells this little sit to pee. Basically, it's a toilet seat that can fit over one of the urine containers that we have. So then an important thing to think about for before you fertilize your garden is whether or not you want to sanitize the urine. Urine from healthy individuals is actually pathogen free and totally safe to use in your garden without sanitizing it. And the World Health Organization has published guidelines sort of advising on this as well. So if you are just using your urine for your own home garden, you don't need to sanitize. You can just use the urine straight away. And the only precaution is that it's recommended to wait at least 30 days after you fertilize any crops that you're going to harvest and eat raw. And this is just kind of extra precaution from the World Health Organization. But if you are going to fertilize a public context, like a farm, or I think community gardens fall in a little bit of a gray area, but it's probably recommended to sanitize the urine before you fertilize a community garden. And the way to do this at home, if you don't have a Brightwater Tools pasteurizer, is you can just store it for about 6 months, and storage will raise the pH in the urine high enough to kill any potential pathogens that could be in there. So then the next thing to think about is when to actually fertilize your garden. And we recommend generally fertilizing based on the nitrogen content in urine because that's the largest, the majority of the nutrients in urine are the nitrogen. And so generally you want to be fertilizing when your plant has its greatest kind of leafy, shooty green growth happening somewhere in the middle of the plant growth stage. And this chart is a good depiction of when that is generally in the middle lifespan of the plant. You don't want to fertilize a plant that's trying to fruit or flower because that'll encourage it to have more shooty growth and less of the fruiting flowering action. You can apply a small amount of urine to, for example, seedlings when you're transplanting them, combined with compost. You just want to be careful not to over apply because you can burn your plant roots. So applying far enough away from the plant roots that you're not going to burn them is another thing to keep in mind. And generally we recommend applying in a few small applications. So you're giving the plants the nutrients they want as they need them, and not over applying, and kind of, yeah, just giving them the nutrients as they grow. So then another consideration to keep in mind is what kinds of plants to fertilize. Generally, again, nitrogen loving plants is always a good option. Leafy greens, tomatoes, brassicas, really anything that has high nitrogen needs. And linked in our guide is a really great resource that the Cornell Cooperative Extension has produced that really breaks down the nitrogen needs of every possible crop you could be growing in your garden. So that's a helpful guide to check out to know the extent of the nitrogen needs of different plants. You can also fertilize fruit or nut trees by generally just applying the urine in the same diameter as the canopy of the tree as a good estimate of where the roots are growing underground. So then when you're out in your garden with your urine at the right time, with the right amount for the right plant, then you just want to basically find a way to incorporate the urine into moist soil. And this is again to help prevent that ammonia volatilization from happening and help the urine incorporate into the soil and get to the plant roots where they will need the nutrients. Urine is a pretty fast acting fertilizer, so it'll won't stay in the ground for a huge amount of time before you apply. So a few different ways to incorporate urine into moist soil. One is to actually make a hole or a shallow furrow about 4 inches away from the base of your plant and apply the urine there and bury it with soil. Another option is to apply the urine next to your plant and then water your garden immediately after, or apply before or during the rain. And this is really what we do with a lot of our farm partners is we'll wait until it's about to rain and then apply on their farm fields. Or you can dilute the urine before application. And this is another good way to both help integrate the urine into the soil and also help prevent against over application. So is there a slide on dilution? Maybe not. Well, dilution is really more an art than a science for home gardening. It's generally somewhere in the 1 part urine to 3 or 5 part water range is the most common, but it really depends on how dry your garden is, and what kind of process you're using to fertilize what kind of area of land. But I think dilution is really helpful for helping not over apply the nutrients, which is important consideration to keep in mind. And one other thing on the sort of process of fertilizing is you want to try to minimize any spraying action so that you're minimizing the exposure of each individual urine droplet to the air and keeping the nutrients in the urine. So you want to kind of pour the urine as close to the ground as possible, and maybe even if you have a watering can that has a spout that you can unscrew so it just comes out in one steady stream is another good way to do it. So for a general rule of thumb to think about how much urine you might want to apply to your garden, we've calculated kind of the average vegetable crop nitrogen needs, and found that basically for a 10-foot by 10-foot garden, you want to apply no more than 3.5 to 5.5 gallons of urine over the entire growing season. So you kind of divide that then by how many applications you're doing. So it's a good kind of very broad rule of thumb to think about how much urine should you be using in your garden, and are you potentially over applying or not. You can also go sort of the more calculated route and actually get some soil tests done by, for example, the UVM Extension Service, I think can help with that. And look at the Cornell Guide to Different Vegetable Plant Nutrient Needs, which we have linked in our Urine My Garden guide. And together with the knowledge of the NPK content of urine, you can calculate exactly how much you need to meet those exact nutrient needs of the plants, knowing the exact nutrient needs of your soil. So I think there's kind of a range of approaches gardeners take, from kind of going that more sort of scientific route versus sort of just observing your plant growth, and if they seem to be growing a little slower, or maybe have some yellowy leaves that might be a sign that they need some nitrogen, and just kind of applying based on observation. There are a few other ways you can fertilize your garden. One that we researched recently in a USDA project was focusing on drip fertigation, which basically is if you have some kind of irrigation system set up in your garden, you can just combine the urine with the water, and that is a great way to get a sort of slow release amount of the urine fertilizer going to the plant roots where you might want them, and is also a good way to help minimize that ammonia volatilization action, because it's a totally sort of enclosed system. Another option is just combining your urine with your compost pile. And basically, to make sure that you're retaining the nitrogen from the urine, you want to only add urine to a compost pile that already has a lot of kind of high carbon content matter in it. The phrase carbon content compost heap always trips me up. But basically what this means is you don't want to be adding urine fertilizer to a compost pile that already has a lot of nitrogen in it from food scraps and other green plant material. So just kind of keep that in mind about whether or not you go this route. You can also combine urine with biochar, which is a really great option because biochar can really absorb the nutrients in urine, and the urine can activate the biochar, and the biochar can keep the nutrients in the urine available in the soil for longer. And that's another area of research that we're focusing on at Rich Earth with some of our field trials. So then, as sort of the final step of fertilizing your own garden, we recommend adding the step of sharing your experiences on our Urine My Garden survey, which is a survey we've been running since 2021 for gardeners around the world who are trying this, so that people can share their experiences of what you've been trying in your own backyard. It includes questions that range from sort of the practical, what crops are you fertilizing and what response are you seeing, to sort of the more psychological and social questions about how is fertilizing with urine changing your relationship with your body and the land and your watershed, and what is motivating you to do it, and how do you talk about it with others. And we'll be doing a webinar sharing some of the results from the past 3 years of this survey later in March. So if you're interested in that, we can share the link to that as well. So one of the questions is about garden response to urine fertilizer. And I think one of the interesting things we found from our survey, which we hadn't really known before and is kind of only anecdotal evidence, but a lot of folks have shared that they've actually found the side benefit of less insect damage or even predation from things like rodents as they've been urine fertilizing, which is kind of interesting to note and something that's not scientifically researched, but definitely a lot of people are reporting that. I think another interesting question is the one about whether or not folks talk to others about using urine as a fertilizer in their gardens. And it really runs the spectrum everywhere from folks who live in, for example, a homeowners association and really don't want their neighbors to know about it. So they'll go out at night with a watering can and kind of fertilize under the stars when no one's watching. To folks on the far other side who are like excited to give bathroom tours of people who visit and take them out into their garden and explain the whole process. Um, and I think there's a fair amount of folks who are somewhere in the middle, folks who say that, you know, they won't necessarily come out and say just as the first thing when you walk in their garden about it, but if you are, you know, asking them why their tomatoes are looking so particularly lush this year, they might respond, well, you know, there's this secret ingredient I've been using. Let me tell you about it. And I think especially in the past couple of years, there have been some big national news articles or media features about peecycling and urine as a fertilizer. And I think those have helped sort of embolden people to talk more about this and come out in the open with a practice that they might have been doing in secrecy before. And that's really one of the big goals of our survey is just kind of highlighting how many people are doing this and help kind of encourage conversation and sort of amplify their voices and take away some of the sort of fear of perception of others that people might have. Because I think it's a lot more common practice around the world than folks might initially realize. So as I said earlier, we do have these kits available for free for Lake Champlain residents who are interested. So if you know anyone or if you yourself would like one, just shoot me an email and we can get one on its way to you for trying out this spring. We also host an annual research summit if you're interested in kind of diving more into what's happening around the world on this front. We have recordings from the past 3 years available on our summit website, and we'll be hosting it again this November in person and virtually. So signing up for a newsletter is a good way to stay connected with that and hear when that is going to be happening again. And with that, I will bring us back together if anyone has questions or